I'm still here. So we are live now? All right, this is Senate Appropriations, and we're going to continue our testimony on the BAA. We have Tracy Dolan here, who's the director of the State Refugee Office, to talk about the proposed appropriation in the budget adjustment as we received it from the governor. And one thing, Tracy, I have asked, and I think we need to I'll raise it, and that is we have agencies around the state, volunteer groups around the state that are dealing with asylees. And I gather they're kind of a stranded group. And so the question is if this is using state dollars to supplement what we get for the refugee, the benefits that the federal government provides. I gather there's nothing for asylees on the federal side.
Sure. So asylees, yes, there are. Asylees are part of the package. I think you're referring to asylum seekers. So asylees are people who have asylum.
No, that are waiting.
Yeah. Asylum seekers are ones who are coming and looking for asylum, but they don't have it yet.
That's right. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I just want to correct it for the record. So asylum seekers in Vermont right now, really, so just a little bit of background on asylum seekers. In the last couple of years, probably last year, we got the best estimate from the Asylum Seeker Network. It's a voluntary network that helps asylum seekers.
Nationally?
No, here in Vermont, yeah. And I think they estimate we got about 40 last year, on track for that or more this year, probably more. And the only folks who really support asylum seekers are the network of small voluntary asylum seeker organizations here in Vermont. I think there's 7 or 8 of them, right, covering different parts of Vermont. And you're right, the federal money for refugees covers a variety of categories, including asylees, including special immigrant visa, et cetera, but they don't cover asylum seekers. And so the money I get from the feds normally, I cannot use in any way for asylum seekers.
But you're proposing state dollars here.
Right. So would you, I'm sorry, would you like me to go ahead and talk about?
Yeah, why don't you talk about, I guess one of the questions, and it's being posed to me because I have the Northeast Kingdom group.
Yes.
And that is, isn't there something the state could do to help this particular group of individuals who would like to become new Americans at some point?
Yeah.
And the big problem, of course, is work permits are glacially slow.
Yeah.
And so we did deal with the impact on property taxes last year because occasionally a seeker will get a work permit, and under the pre-existing, the past law, that the income from that individual had to be counted toward the household. And what host families were finding was that they were losing on their property tax sensitivity. So we got language to exclude the income from that particular source. Yeah. But the question is whether, I guess you could say if the minute you start putting state dollars in, the state can determine. And my question was how to request a made to your office for some kind of assistance for these individuals, many of whom have health conditions, emergency dental, et cetera, and are actually destitute.
So the language, to the best of my knowledge around this, doesn't necessarily specify that it can't be asylum seekers. The language is broad enough that it really talks about employment, kind of long-term economic sufficiency. And I think there are a lot of things that go along with that. And so helping people figure out how to get driver's licenses, doing what you can to connect people up with English language learning so that eventually they can work, helping people get on track for work. And the language, this appropriation, I think, is broad enough that it could include an organization that helps asylum seekers. So for example, there is an umbrella organization that supports them, and it might make sense that a portion of this money, for example, could go to them, probably a smaller portion. Sure. could go to them to then maybe administer in a way that would make sense. It appears from the language I see that it would go beyond the scope of this language to be paying for direct medical bills, things like that. But there are costs. I did reach out and talk to the Asylum Seeking Network a little bit, and it looks like there are costs that they put out that relate to things that could relate to employment. So that might make sense, but I haven't delved into it significantly.
Okay, thank you. So we put some money in last year, I believe, it was out of the, I think it was for the Brattleboro initiative.
No, not just for the Brattleboro.
No, but
Oh,
that was sort of the genesis of the request. I
Okay.
didn't think some of the work that was happening in Brattleboro. I didn't mean that the money only went there.
Sure, yeah.
So why don't we let you do your presentation of the request as it's being defined and you understand it in the budget adjustment, because I've kind of got you off track. But if I don't forget, I have someone in my town who is very active volunteer with the asylum seekers. And
Yeah, and I can certainly I'll come back to asylum seekers.
so,
That makes sense.
so that's why I raised it, because
Yeah.
that way I can say I at least have some understanding of what we're doing for them or what this might be able to help.
Okay,
So, all right, we'll let you.
I thought I
start
would
with your
just give you a little background so we're all on the same page, because it's a little bit of a complicated program, but I can make it easy. Does that sound okay?
Yes, that sounds
Great.
great. Making it easy sounds wonderful.
Okay, good. So the Vermont Refugee Resettlement Mission, I am the director of the Office of the Refugee Office. That's in the Agency of Human Services, and it's a standalone office. It doesn't sit in a department. The mission is to promote and provide a safe and welcoming home for refugees and immigrants, and to promote their full participation as self-sufficient individuals and families in the economic, social, and civic life of Vermont. So that's the overall mission. We'll go to the next slide.
Trish, are you the only one in the office?
It's me and a health coordinator. Yeah. And next slide. So the number of refugees assigned to a state is determined by the State Department. So it doesn't go state by state where a state asks for a certain amount per se. So the president every year makes an announcement, a designation. So this current year we're in, the amount is for 125,000 nationally. And then what happens is each state works with the resettlement agencies to determine how many they think they can reasonably take in. And so we have two resettlement agencies in Vermont. We have USCRI, you might have known them as the Vermont Refugee Resettlement Program, and they are based out of Colchester. And we have ECDC, they are new, they're about a year-ish old, a little more than a year old, and they are situated in Brattleboro. So those two agencies then get together with their national offices. All the big national refugee agencies get together, there's 10 of them, and they sort through, okay, how many are we actually going to take of 125,000 show up, and where will we put them, and which states make sense given the offices we have. We have 4 official sites in Vermont. So for USCRI, we have Colchester and Rutland. Rutland is a new official site. We've had people in Rutland before, but we've never had USCRI staff in Rutland, so that's a new USCRI site. We have Brattleboro, which is ECDC's site, and a new site in Bennington. We had refugees in Bennington, but we didn't have an official office there, so we have 4 sites. So those 4 sites then put in to say, this is how many we think we can take. And then the resettlement agencies work with them, and then we agree, right, the governor and my office agrees. And then basically the federal government says yes or no, or adjusts your amount. And I'll get to those.
Out of this year then, out of the 125,000, how many came from them?
And if you don't mind, I'll get to all the numbers.
I'm getting ahead.
Yeah. I can walk you through the numbers in just a minute.
And the resettlement agencies, those are people who work there would be federal employees because they're working with the.
No, they are nonprofits. So USCR and ECDC is a nonprofit, yeah. So last year was a unique year. Normally we get mostly people with the official status of refugees. Last year, most of the folks who came here that we call refugees were actually humanitarian parolees from Afghanistan. They came in under a different immigration designation because it was an emergency and there wasn't time for them to be processed appropriately as refugees.
So what's a parolee?
Yeah, humanitarian.
Interesting term.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with criminal procedures.
Yeah.
It's an emergency, humanitarian parole is an emergency status that is rarely used, but it was used in a couple of large incidents in our history, and one was the Afghan, but there's only been about 3 or 4 populations who have come into that.
And the those would be mostly people that had supported
Yeah,
the government that was non-Taliban.
yes, most of the folks who came in as humanitarian parolees in this were folks who had also supported our troops or been involved in some way. Yeah.
Whose lives were in complete threat.
Oh,
yes.
Ukrainian.
Yeah, that's the Afghan humanitarian parolees. Yeah, Ukrainian humanitarian parolees came in. They were not associated with our troops. So humanitarian parolee is a unique emergency status. In the case of the Afghans, many of them were engaged with our efforts. So last year was unique in that normally we get refugees broadly, and normally most of them are refugee status. Last year, most of the folks coming in were actually humanitarian parolees from Afghanistan, mostly, some from the Ukraine, and a much smaller number of refugees. And I'll show you on the next
This large
page.
influx of Haitian Cuban entrance into that's in the national program or to the Vermont?
Yeah, and that was really just for the national picture. We have a much larger influx of Haitian entrants into our country, even compared to Afghans for the whole country. We just don't happen to have many of them here, maybe one or two. But in some states, the number of Haitians who arrived or Cubans who arrived was much, much larger than even the Afghan arrival. So that was just really for the national picture. And then I can walk through the numbers on the next page. So you'll see here, if we go back way over to 2016, so the top line is the federal fiscal year, right? So that runs from October 1st through September 30th. And then the next line is the number of refugees. That's people with actual refugee status. The next line is the number of Afghan humanitarian parolees, and then the number of Ukrainian humanitarian parolees, and then the total. So if we go way over to 2016, that's where I started the number, because from about 2007 to 2016, this was a pretty consistent number for us. We were getting between 350 and 400 refugees a year. So not families, but individuals. So a lot of those are families, but that's the actual number. And then with the change in the federal administration, with the Trump administration, there was a very concerted effort to reduce the refugee program and mostly almost close to eliminate it. And they were very effective in doing that. And you can see the numbers started dropping almost immediately. So by 2020, our numbers were down as low as 23, and this happened all over the country in every state. COVID also impacted these numbers, so that was part of the drop there. But overall, the goal was to bring it down. So Biden put out a number of 125,000. I believe the number in Trump's last year was 15,000. So pretty, big difference. And then you see it start to pick back up. 2022. We had 91 refugees, if you look at that top line. But we had a lot of people, but most of them were not refugee status. We had 246 Afghan humanitarian parolees. And then these are estimates, these Ukrainian humanitarian parolees. And I'll speak to that in a minute, but the Ukrainians are not coming in through the mutual refugee program. They're not coming in through the US government in that way. So we don't have any accounting for them on our end. And they don't come in through the resettlement agencies and get placed with them. It's a private sponsorship program. So a Vermonter goes online and actually puts in a financial affidavit and says, I would like to bring over this Ukrainian or this Ukrainian family. I'm willing to pay for it. I will cover their basic expenses when they're here, and they get matched up, and then they're sent over. What we don't know is, we don't even know if it gets approved, except most of them do. We don't know when they arrive. We don't know if they're going to arrive. The only way I know if people have actually showed up is if a sponsor reaches out to me and says, hey, how do I get benefits for them? So what I've been doing is I've been checking with Medicaid every month, because they are eligible for Medicaid. The humanitarian parolees are eligible for all the same benefits as a refugee would be.
They are.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So then I check in with Medicaid to see how many Ukrainian applications we've had. So we've had about 58 applications, but that's not all of the Ukrainians here. I know there's more than that here. So this is just a wild guess, but I think we probably got 50 in 2022, and I think we've probably gotten 30. We are approved right now for about 100, or there are 135 applications associated with Vermont. And we could have way more than that, because you don't have to stay where you come. So they could show up in New Hampshire and come on over to Vermont.
Are there definitions that go, in other words, a refugee is defined as X, and obviously there are.
Yeah.
What is the definition of a refugee? What to give that status to an individual coming into the country, as opposed to
humanitarian parole.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't prep the definitions coming in. It is a legal immigration definition, but in a nutshell, a refugee is designated before they come into this country as a refugee. Yeah, they either through the UN or through the US refugee program, and they are people who have to leave. Not that they are choosing to leave, but they have to leave because it would be too dangerous for them to stay due to political affiliation, religion, in some cases a natural disaster, but almost always due to war or political affiliation or cultural affiliation.
Some coming from Central America, maybe all those.
By Texas.
Yes.
Outside of Texas, but it's not with prior approval, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, that's where it gets confusing.
I know. So let me see, we had a couple of questions.
Sure,
from
yeah.
Senator Starr, and then Senator Lyons, you had a question?
No, I don't. I'm fine.
Once a common gets on the Medicaid,
Yes.
how long can they stay on Medicaid?
They can stay on all of the benefits that any other lower income Vermonter would stay on until they start making more money than would allow them to stay on that. So really, they're just like any other Vermonter. Once they're on, Medicaid does the same check-ins with them. Right now, anyone on Medicaid will stay on Medicaid until the public emergency is lifted through Medicaid. So actually, Medicaid is on a COVID rule right now, at least probably through May. So that hasn't been happening with people coming off, but once that reverts back to normal, any low-income Vermonter who
They're
needs to
treated the
check
same
in.
as any other.
That's right, yeah, for all the benefits. They get on the benefits, but once they make more money than you can on that benefit, they can only stay on if they meet the means test.
Yeah.
Senator Lyons, you had a question?
Yeah, quickly, so your office then provides assistance for folks in terms of application for all of the different services?
My office supports organizations that do that,
That
yeah,
do
so I provide funding to USCRI, to ECDC. AALV is not a resettlement agency, but they provide a lot of refugee assistance, and I provide them funding and work with them on data and oversight so that they can help people get all of these benefits. The goal is really the economic self-sufficiency, so that eventually these families can be working, and they do go to work very quickly.
Yeah, they, and they're subject to the work permit process the same as,
No, refugees usually come with a work permit.
they do come with it. Okay.
Yeah, the humanitarian parolees, the Ukrainian ones, the Afghans mostly came with it, or it was within a few weeks. The Ukrainians, it's taking a little longer, but the asylum seekers, which are the ones you were talking about earlier, they actually have to apply for asylum, which is a pretty big lift, and you normally need a lawyer to do that because most asylum applications are not approved. Asylum applications are approved at a rate of 25% maybe. So if you have a lawyer, your odds go up. So they have to apply for asylum, but they have to wait about 6 months, and then actually 1 more month, and then they can get an employment document authorization while they wait to hear back. But that employment authorization could take a while. But then, and it can take years actually to hear back. But then they can work during that time. But the feds just made a change for Venezuelans and I believe Nicaraguans, where they can come in and actually get that employment authorization very quickly, because that's the problem, right? People showing up, they want to apply for asylum, and then they have to wait months to work. So you have this huge load where volunteers or anyone has to support these folks who actually really want to work right now. And we have businesses who would like to hire them right now. So the feds have made some changes for Nicaraguans, Venezuelans, and I'm not sure who else, to allow them to do that more quickly.
We didn't make the Afghans go through any of that, did we?
The Afghans, no, they got their employment authorization within a few weeks, for the most part, yeah.
So the asylum seekers really are in a much longer track.
They are.
Because they've got to have their application approved, and then their work permit would have to be issued after approval, I guess.
After they submit their asylum application, let's say best case scenario, they get a work permit maybe 7 months later.
Best case.
Yeah, that's probably best case, yeah.
And their housing and everything else is cared for in the interim by
Volunteers.
volunteers.
Volunteers, all host families.
Yeah, not everyone stays with the host family. Sometimes they do other things, but basically,
Well, how can they pay their rent?
yeah.
Yeah,
Or,
do
You know,
anything
Yeah,
without a job.
yeah, it's a tough situation for sure. And I got a call from the Border Patrol 2 weeks ago. A Haitian man had shown up with his young son. It was snowing out. I mean, the directions are to let them in. And there's nobody for them, you know, and so I referred them to one of the asylum seeking organizations to help them out, but there's no budget for them. So this funding could allow me to take a little bit of that. The way the language is right now, it's really around employment. So if they were able to steer some of their efforts, you know, I'd probably be able to support it. If they were able to give me a proposal to say, you know, we're gonna help some people figure out their driver's license and get them into English classes and maybe get them apprenticeships to be ready for their employment. All those things would probably be able to be supported. But the major part of the funds is meant for
Shelter,
refugees.
food, and
No,
medical care, none of that is, it's all on the host family or the owner.
Oh, yeah, for asylum seekers right now, there's really no benefits at all. You get emergency Medicaid, so you can get emergency Medicaid, which covers emergencies.
There isn't anything that we can do, it's all controlled by the feds, right?
For the Medicaid piece, yeah.
No, I mean, we can't. give
Oh, yeah,
them
you can't give them immigration status, no.
Temporary,
No,
Vermont.
no, the issue for us is as a state, as we're doing for the refugees, should there be some
Right.
modest amount to support or to meet emergency needs
Yeah.
or basic needs of this population, because they don't qualify.
Yeah. And a lot of states are having this discussion right now, I can tell you that, because I sit on the board of the state refugee coordinators nationally. And I can tell you that there's lots of states having that discussion right now because it's been really more visible in the last 2 years, the asylum seekers.
I don't know how this data volunteers in the Texas area.
Exactly. I mean, we can probably handle 30, 40, imagine thousands, right?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, I think in those states, they probably have released some emergency funding is my guess.
And no,
Right.
if a busload of Haitian immigrants showed up in Vermont, dropped off in Burlington, they would be seekers or they, because they
They're all
get,
asylum seekers, yeah. and
you
we
just have
do
to
have-
deal with them on an
We
emergency.
do have a contingency emergency plan because the governor asked us to put something together. And so, you know, we have a loose plan for figuring out some short-term housing, figuring out short-term care, short-term food. But we need more engagement with the governor to figure out how far he would want to go and how to do that. I think the hope was, hey, this would be great for our workforce, but I think there might have been not a full understanding of how long it would take to. Yeah, so it's a tricky situation, which is why they deal with the Venezuelans, so they also get a type of role, the Venezuelans. And
No, what is the policy basis for Venezuelans versus
I don't
this or
know.
that? It
I don't
seems rather,
Yeah, I don't know the politics.
Yeah,
of
what
it.
does the State Department tell us about?
I don't,
Things are not good in Venezuela.
no, they are not good.
Yeah,
Yeah, Venezuela's a mess.
I think it's
And,
how compelling it is, you know, but there's also probably politics behind it as well. I don't know.
Surprising.
Yeah.
Shocking.
Shocking, I'm shocked. All right.
So I can tell you, if it's okay.
Yes.
So last year, right, 2022, we had 91 refugees. You can see the refugee numbers if you just look, right? They were high in 2016 and then you see them go low. And then 2023,
What was in 2016?
2016, actually, that was just symbolic of many years before. So we
There was-
really had those numbers the whole time. That was our norm while the
So you're
refugee
showing
program was
just the
happening.
change.
Yeah, I was just really showing you the change here, yeah. So far in 2023, we're just in the first quarter. Refugee arrivals tend to pick up toward the end of the fiscal year every year, for reasons that I don't know.
And then, in 2022, you had 246.
Afghan
Afghan.
humanitarian, yeah. And that program's finished now. We'll get Afghans now, but they'll just come in as refugees. Yeah. Because they've now been able to catch up with the process.
Could any of them come in as asylum seekers?
Asylum seekers, I mean, people can present at the border as an asylum seeker, but they don't officially get sent as an asylum seeker, you know what I mean?
No,
It's not really small engagement. So then, going to the next page, so what's coming this year, right, 2023? So ECDC and USCRI, I mentioned that all the agencies get together and figure out how many are we gonna take. They have been approved to collectively receive 425 refugees this year. From the feds and, you know, through our agreement. But I don't know that we're gonna get that many, because I don't know that the US is gonna actually reach their 125,000 mark. I'm guessing, based on what we're hearing, that the US, as much as they wanna take people in, they have a somewhat broken system out there and they're still staffing up from the decay of the system. So we might only get 65,000 nationally, which might put us closer to 250 or 300. I don't know how many refugees we get this year. The arrivals depend on that overseas plan and how well it works. The main focus of the resettlement activity is employment related, job placement, ELL. There are a lot of other things that happen, and I can just briefly describe that. First, I'll just briefly talk about the Ukrainians, yes.
What about I mean, certainly a number of these folks coming in are looking for educational opportunities, and how do you handle that?
Yeah.
You know, college or whatever.
Yeah, I can just quickly go to the core services and then touch on the education.
No.
You'll wait, okay, that's great. So the Ukrainians, and I will speak to education, so the Ukrainians, again, coming in through a different system, through the sponsorship. We've got 135 applications for Vermont. We had 57 for sure, maybe 80, it's a guess. They are eligible for most of the same services. It's just been very tricky because they're all over Vermont, so they're not close to a center to get services. But USCRI and ECDC, there's funding available if they enroll with them for the same kinds of case management type of services. So I've given funding to USCRI that I have uniquely for Ukrainians, and they are enrolling some people when they reach out to
So how
enroll.
much do you have uniquely for Ukrainians?
I will get,
You get.
I can get to the budget in just a minute.
All right.
Yeah, that's okay, yep. Because there's some money uniquely for Ukrainians, uniquely for Afghans, and then for everyone else, and that's very challenging.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it's sort of terrible. I mean, it's nice to have money, but it's kind of terrible that you then have to like program it up weirdly.
Or you can get help, but you can't.
Yeah, so you want to keep that behind the curtain, but that gets very tricky, right? Because you end up having kind of a luxury program for one group and then the basics for others, and it's not great. So the core services, what happens when a refugee arrives? These resettlement agencies really are intense for the first 90 days and then provide services for up to 5 years with the funding from my office. They get an airport pickup and a welcome meal. They get assistance with securing housing. They don't get money except for a little bit of welcome money at the beginning. They get $1,125 each. That comes from the feds, and that's a one-time, which normally would pay for first month's rent and security, those kinds of things. We had VRAP, which was a really big blessing this year, right? So this is a little bit different, but normally that money would be gone pretty quickly with that. They get assistance with employment, and so USCRI and ECDC have employment case managers that help hook them up with jobs. They often want to work right away. Sometimes we encourage them to wait a little bit so that they can definitely lock into their reach-up benefits and hopefully learn a little English, because maybe they can get a slightly better job if they wait 2 months and have a little bit of better English, especially if they come in as a professional. We don't want to slide them into minimum wage if they actually have a lot of expertise and they just need a little bit more English. School registration, of course, the kids get registered right away. And in Vermont, it doesn't matter what your status is. If you're a child living in Vermont, you go to school. You never have to prove, your residency other than living here. English language learning classes, that's actually a requirement for some of them who get refugee cash assistance. Normally people get reach up if they're a family, but if you're an individual, you get a special federal benefit called refugee cash assistance for up to 12 months. But you have to take English classes in order to get that, and they all
Who
do.
administers the cash assistance?
That's administered by USCRI as a contract with AHS, but it comes out of the DCF Economic Services. Yeah. They get the one-time payment that I mentioned. They get a domestic health assessment, so they basically get a doctor's visit that goes through a lot of basic tests. And they get help enrolling in the benefit programs, Medicaid, Reach Out, Refugee Cash Assistance, SNAP, like.
So on the healthcare front for asylum seekers, the FQHCs, if they were to treat them, do they get reimbursement?
No, they
On
can
the
get,
federal,
no, I think except in the case of an emergency. I think there is an emergency Medicaid, so I think it's, and I don't know the definition, but it's a major event. But for regular care, as far as I know, you would not get reimbursed for assisting an asylum seeker.
any more than, except we did fund healthcare for undocumented migrant workers.
So
last year.
the free clinics may be available to these folks.
Yeah, I don't know that they would get reimbursed by the feds. That's what I mean.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, but yes, free clinics sometimes take people. Yeah.
And on the school registration, how old, like can 21-year-olds, will they go to school? And
No, probably, and I'm not certain, but I don't know if 21-year-olds going to high school. I think it would be the regular high school age, but I'm not certain about that.
see, because we allow people to go until what, they're 22.
So then it would be whatever the rules are here.
Oh,
Yeah, sorry, I thought you were, whatever the rules are
If
here
they
would
don't
apply
have
for
a
them.
high school diploma,
pardon?
if they don't have a high school diploma, we
They-
cover them. The question is, if you have someone coming in
Oh, with the diploma.
that will have the equivalent, then maybe, so much of this is gonna be individual specific.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't come up a lot. I know if somebody wants to go to school and they're school age, they can go and so if an 19-year-old showed up and wanted to go to high school and the high school allowed for that based on their age, I believe the person would be able to register. To the best of my knowledge.
Senator Lyon.
So, yes, and I hear a lot about professionals coming in with professional degrees or certifications, and they're not allowed to go into their engineering or their medical practice, and how do we sort that out? And I know that there might be some discussion in various committees on that, but have you seen a number of folks with those backgrounds where they need?
Yeah, so sometimes folks come here with a medical degree and we don't recognize their
They
medical
can't
degree. Yeah, and things like that. And so I think that they can then apply to a school, and a school, if they put the energy into it, and I don't know what the decision making is, they can check, they can check equivalency, right? So sometimes the refugee might need to provide paperwork, background documentation, or they might need to meet an equivalency test to be credentialed. Yeah, my office doesn't engage with that too much, although I think I will be getting a grant to BSAC to be working with people to try to get them back into education, some adults.
Well, that'd be interesting also to work with,
Especially tech.
work with institutions.
But that gets into the whole focus is employment,
Yeah,
so that
yeah.
makes sense.
Yes,
For that, but those are, once again, we're talking about the refugee status or the parolees.
Yeah, refugees, yeah, et cetera. However, with this funding again, right, when we're talking in this appropriation, the language I think is fairly broad and talks about community supports to achieve economic self-sufficiency. So if the asylum seeking organization had a small pot and decided to use it toward that, I think that would make sense. But the goal of that, and I can speak to why this amount is being asked for in just a minute when I talk about the budget and how it's calculated.
That would be good.
Yeah.
You had another question?
Good, thank you.
Okay. So I think we're going to the next one. So how is the work funded? There's direct funding that goes to the resettlement agencies to help them for that first 90 days. The funding I give them really helps them do the work for the rest of the time. There's also federal funding to my office through the Office of Refugee Resettlement. I get base funding, which is the funding that really does all of the case management, right? So organizations assign someone a case manager, help them get a job, you know, all those things. But then I get only new, right, because of the Afghan specific money. And then when the Ukrainians came, Ukrainian specific money. And then in a few cases set aside for unique content areas, like just for schools, just for health promotion, just for the elderly. The base funding is the challenge. The way it's calculated is based on look back data. So if you look at our refugee numbers the last 2 years, the actual refugee numbers are really low. So that's the federal formula that they're giving me this year, and they're giving all states. But you can see our numbers this year are supposed to be much higher, right? Because they sort of fixed the system. And so that's the challenge. Right now, it looks like I'm gonna get 160,000 for the whole year for all the case management, for all the new refugees. There's no way that's gonna cover it. I've got plenty of Afghan money and I've got some Ukrainian money, and I'll get to the budget in a minute. So I can use it for them, but it gets tricky then because it's hard to make this other amount stretch. So for example, AALV works with a pretty good number of refugees every year on this employment case management. They gave me a proposal for next year. I can't actually fund them because when I don't have enough money, my requirement is to prioritize people in their first year. AALV works with them a little bit later. So I can't fund AALV because I don't have enough.
What is AALV?
The Association of Africans Living in Vermont.
They had an allocation in the budget 2 years running during COVID.
Yeah, and they and USCRI got money to help a lot of
I'm
folks.
determined you don't have enough.
I did. I mean, based on, I did an RFP and money came in, and with what the feds gave me and the amount, especially for the refugees, I realized I need to prioritize ECDC and USCRI because they're working with the first years, the people coming in in their first year. And
So what you're doing is matching the services with what you,
with what I have, yeah. So I gave the AALV I have enough money to give them for youth mentoring because I have a set aside for that. I gave them some money for a couple of other things that I have set asides for, but for the refugee money, and it's just an example, right? But for the money for working with new refugees coming in, I don't have enough to give it to everyone who would normally be working. Yeah. So that's just an example of how that look back hurts us, and it's happening in every state, not just this one. However, I do want to highlight, the feds just said that they're going to give a supplement this year to address this problem, but I don't know exactly when and I don't know how much. That happened between when the governor wrote that appropriation request and today, but I don't know how much that's going to be, and I don't know if it's going to be sufficient to cover the gap.
so
Checks and
you said state funding in the current state fiscal year, state funding
Yes,
is $500,000 aid to refugees.
that was the amount that you referred to. I think you said the Genesis was Brattleboro. So that money that came in that I needed to spend by June this year, that came in last year, we programmed that.
So this current state fiscal year.
Yeah, I'm sorry, so it came in last calendar year. So it came in July of last year, right? So, so it was used, I put out an RFP, it was used for apprenticeships, those kinds of things, ELL in the workplace, employment-related work, and then some housing-related supports. Because some people are taking off VRAP, and some people are losing their utility subsidy. And so the agency said right now that's still a crisis for folks, the housing costs. So they wanted to be able to use some of it to support them and for the Ukrainians. Some of the sponsors are saying we can't actually afford to support the Ukrainians because we all knew that wasn't going to last for a full 2 years. It's a lot of money to bring a family in and support them. And so USCRI is going to use some of the money to help some of the Ukrainians with housing as well. So that's the current 500,000 that's in the current budget.
And
The total state.
current for fiscal
Yes.
year 23.
For fiscal year 23, yeah, it ends in the end of June this year. Yeah, they have to have.
And the budget adjustment then would increase the 500,000 right up at 350.
That's right.
Okay.
So that's fine, yeah. And Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation in Brattleboro, they work side by side with ECDC. ECDC is brand new, and it's been helpful to have a little bit more of a veteran organization working with them. Sorry about that. And so Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation has been really helpful on the employment side. The somewhat easy part is working with employees to get them a job. What we haven't been able to do is really work with employers on how do you hire someone? How do you make it so that it works out? You know, are there toolkits? They actually need a lot of management up front, the employers do, especially new employers. USCRI and AALV have been working with some employers in the Chittenden area for years. So they're kind of used to it. Now they know that, you know, they know what documents to, oh, okay, we know that we should bring English classes in here. We know what kind of job, you know, we know it. But in places where it's new, they're nervous to hire. They wonder, are they going to stay? Their actually work ethic is great, but they don't know that, you know? There's just a lot of management and handholding that needs to be done. So Brattleboro Development Corporation is an example of one organization that would benefit from this funding to do more of that longer term planning and actually working to build up an employer base that can support them. But others would actually do the same kind of work because I know USCRI would like to do more long-term planning. AALV's been working with some organizations on that.
How is AALV funded?
Through a variety of mechanisms, and I don't know all their funding. We give them some. They work with New Americans across the board. Department of Health gives them some money around some programs. They get some federal money. Yeah, they're very much a shoestring budget organization that does a ton of work. Yeah, they're really impressive.
So the 350 that's being requested is it really because the 500,000 was insufficient, or I just want to be clear, would it be doing something in addition to what you envisioned with that $500,000 appropriation?
Yeah, especially now that I know that when we first got that, we didn't know how many refugees we'd be getting this year. With this possible 425 coming in, and I can show you the budget that we have right now, so I can explain that a little bit. This is the federal budget, but if you see at the top, 97,000, that was the first allocation. Right now, without the supplement that I mentioned that we will hopefully get, we're probably only going to get 160,000 for support services for refugees. So that's for all of it. So this money would really be more support service money. But like you mentioned, because I'm not under the restrictions of the feds, it could be used for a few other groups like asylum seekers. And also things like helping people figure out driver's licenses, having a little bit of money maybe to engage a driver education program because they're ready to drive and it's a limiting factor for work. All kinds of creative things that they could do. But at the most basic, probably more case management support for the employment services, because if we get that many refugees right now, we might be in trouble depending on how big this supplement is.
So you're saying all 250 would go into, all 350 of the VA would go into the support service?
Yeah, it wouldn't be called this line, but yes, it would be as
That's
described. It would be the employment support services working with employers and different activities to get them to work. I think we have some flexibility there because driving is a bottleneck right now. Maybe some of it for organizations that might make sense for them to work on that. Working in the Brattleboro area, we definitely need to build up employers who have comfort level with this, so that would be that. It wouldn't be probably for housing, things like that. I think the language really tries to tighten it up around employment-related things.
Other questions?
Yeah, so I'll be really quick.
You may be the last one.
Okay, well, we had a huge discussion last year about the cultural implications of, for supporting folks, the kids. For example, in the new school, there's a high proportion of refugees.
Yeah.
So how do you apportion what you're doing with what local communities are doing? Because they're already doing a lot of things, in particular in the school system.
Yeah.
And how are you working?
So I have school impact funding, actually.
And that's what that is?
Yeah, I don't know that they get another amount. They certainly get some through the Agency of Education, like the federal. But they get unique refugee money through me that helps fund some of their home liaisons, the cultural liaisons, and fund some of those programs. So right now I support Winooski, Brattleboro, Burlington. I have more money that I'm having trouble getting rid of, to be frank, just for Afghan students, because it gets really tricky to put in a budget and a program just for Afghan students. So
Yeah.
I am trying to desperately figure out how I can still be not cheating, but slightly cheating to use that money, right? So, my business
No, we
office is
talked
like-
about expansive interpretation.
Yes,
Yes.
oh, I am so expensive, but it's tricky. So that's the tricky part. If you looked in my bank account, right, you would see actually money for Afghans that is unspent. But my challenge is with refugees coming in, I can't use most of that for the new refugees, so I'm in a funny position.
Yeah.
See, if you look here, support services, 97,000 for this year, that'll probably be closer to 160 when it all comes in. But look, for this year alone, FY23, they gave me a new 600,000 just for the Afghans. And we only got 260 Afghans. And this year we're supposed to get 425 refugees, and many of whom aren't Afghans, so it's very tricky. So that's why I'm a little bit worried about our funding for refugees this
I
year.
wonder why they tie it so closely to the Afghanis.
Yeah, why?
Why don't they give you some leeway?
Well, we've been asking them to drop these nationality based, because this is new, this has never happened before. And then they did it for the Ukrainians, we're like, please don't do it for the Ukrainians, and then they did. And so then you're stuck, right? Because, and it's not nice for the visibility either, right? Because I don't want to put out an RFP that says, why don't you give me an RFP for a program just for this group or that group? So it gets tricky.
Yeah, it's hard to keep it separate.
We
Yes,
tried to
yes.
do away with that kind of stuff in Vermont.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's-
Treat everybody
Yeah.
as.
Well, integration.
It's because Congress, allotted a lot more money, so they wanted to see the accountability, right? So it's about accountability.
Some of it, and some of it is just about political
Yes,
implications
yeah.
and the environment in which
Yes,
individuals are leaving their country.
yeah.
And
And it's more palatable, probably publicly, right, to support Afghans and Ukrainians. Probably feels less palatable when it's countries that people are not as familiar with, or they don't see the strife, all of
I
that.
somewhat agree with that, but the Afghans that supported us in the war,
Oh,
we had a
absolutely.
moral responsibility.
Oh, we did. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. And to be honest, some of them arrived here. One family arrived here, and within a month, one of them, his younger brother, was murdered. But the Taliban are actively hunting their families. horrible. And a lot of them, half their families are home, they're trying to get them here, they're in hiding. Some of them have more kids at home who have to go to school in apartments because they can't send them to the school because they can't be exposed. It's terrible.
Yes. Other questions? Otherwise, at 2, I think we were having our joint with finance and on our revenue forecast. So thank you. Sorry we were a little late.
No, and I hope you didn't mind the background, but I thought if we all had the same background.
No,